The piece of paper was folded so small, it almost disappeared between the makeup containers and guitar picks scattered across Bob Marley's dressing room table. But the desperation in those handwritten words would stop one of the biggest concerts in Jamaica's history and send Bob Marley racing through Kingston's streets on a mission to save a life. Kingston, Jamaica. November 15th, 1979. Bob Marley and the Wailers were preparing for what was supposed to be the concert of the year. The National Stadium was packed with 25,000 people who had been waiting hours to see their reggae king perform. The energy outside was electric, with vendors selling food, Rastafarians chanting prayers, and the sound of drums echoing through the warm Caribbean night. But inside the cramped dressing room beneath the stadium, Bob was experiencing something that would change everything. He'd been looking for his lucky guitar pick, the worn piece of tortoiseshell that he'd used for every major performance since 1975, when his fingers brushed against something that didn't belong. A small piece of notebook paper, folded multiple times, tucked behind a bottle of stage makeup. Bob unfolded it slowly, expecting maybe a fan letter or a request for an autograph. What he found instead made his blood run cold. "Dear Mr. Bob Marley," the note began in shaky handwriting. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. I wanted you to know that your music was the only thing that kept me alive this long. No Woman, No Cry played on repeat during my darkest nights, but even your songs can't save me now. Thank you for giving me a few more months of hope. Marie, age 19. Bob read the note 3 times, his hands trembling more with each reading. At the bottom, in even smaller writing, were the words that made his heart stop. Kingston Harbor Bridge after your concert starts. I want to hear your music one last time before I go. Bob's manager, Danny, knocked on the dressing room door. "Bob, we need to go. The crowd's getting restless." Bob folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket. When he opened the door, his expression was grim. "Danny, cancel the concert." "What? Bob, there are 25,000 people out there. We can't cancel it." Bob's voice was firm, final. "Tell them there's a family emergency. Tell them anything. But I'm not performing tonight." Danny stared at his friend in confusion. In 15 years of working together, Bob had never canceled a show. Not when he was sick, not when there were death threats, not even when his equipment had been sabotaged. "Bob, what's wrong? What happened?" Bob showed Danny the note. Danny read it twice, then looked up at Bob with understanding and fear. "We have to find her," Bob said simply. "Right now." Bob grabbed his acoustic guitar and headed for the exit. Danny tried to protest, explaining about contracts and disappointed fans and lost revenue. But Bob was already pushing through the backstage area toward the parking lot. "Good Junior," Bob called to his guitarist. "I need your motorcycle." "Bob, where are you going? We're supposed to be on stage in 10 minutes. "Trust me, brother. This is more important than any concert." Within minutes, Bob was racing through Kingston's crowded streets on Junior's motorcycle, his guitar strapped to his back, weaving between cars and buses as he headed toward the harbor. The warm night air whipped through his dreadlocks as he pushed the bike faster, knowing that somewhere ahead, a 19-year-old girl was planning to end her life. Kingston Harbor Bridge was a massive concrete structure that connected the city's commercial district to the residential areas across the water. At night, it was usually empty except for the occasional taxi or late-night walker. But as Bob approached, he could see a small figure standing at the bridge's center, silhouetted against the harbor lights. Bob parked the motorcycle and walked slowly onto the bridge. The figure was indeed a young woman, thin and fragile-looking, standing at the railing and staring down at the dark water 30 feet below. "Marie?" Bob called softly. The girl turned, startled. Her eyes widened when she recognized him. "Mr. Marley, but you're supposed to be performing. Your concert." "The concert can wait," Bob said gently, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "You left me a note." Marie's face crumpled. "You weren't supposed to find it until after. I wanted you to know that your music mattered, that it helped someone, even if it couldn't help enough." Bob was close enough now to see the tears on her face, the exhaustion in her eyes. "Marie, tell me what's hurting you so much that you want to give up on tomorrow." Marie shook her head, gripping the railing tighter. "You wouldn't understand. You have everything. Fame, money, people who love you. My life. There's nothing left." "Try me," Bob said, setting his guitar down carefully and leaning against the railing next to her, but not too close. "I wasn't born with fame or money. I was born in 9 Mile, poorer than you can imagine. My father left when I was small. I know what it feels like to think the world has no place for you." Something in Bob's voice made Marie hesitate. She looked at him with surprise. "Really? Really? There were nights in Trenchtown when I was your age, maybe younger, when I thought about giving up too. When the hunger was too much, when the violence was too much, when it felt like no matter how hard I tried, nothing would ever get better." Marie wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "What stopped you?" "Music," Bob said simply. "And the understanding that pain is temporary, but the music you create from that pain can be eternal. Tell me about your pain, Marie. Help me understand." Slowly, haltingly, Marie began to talk. She told Bob about losing both parents in a car accident 6 months earlier, about being left alone with debts she couldn't pay and a future that seemed impossibly bleak. She talked about working 3 jobs just to afford her small room, about eating 1 meal a day, about lying awake at night listening to Bob's songs and wondering if tomorrow would bring any relief. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I'm 19 years old, and I feel like I've already lived too long." Bob nodded, understanding flooding through him. "Marie, can I tell you something? Pain is not something you have to carry alone. And your life, it has value that you can't see right now, because you're too close to it." "How do you know?" Marie asked, genuine curiosity in her voice now. "Because you survived 6 months of hell and you're still here. Because you took the time to write me a note thanking me for my music, which means even in your darkest hour, you're thinking about gratitude. Because right now, instead of jumping, you're talking to me. That tells me you want to live, Marie. You just don't know how." As they talked, something interesting began to happen. Cars started pulling over, first one, then 2, then several. Word had somehow spread through Kingston's tight-knit community that Bob Marley was on the Harbor Bridge, and people were coming to see what was happening. A small crowd began to gather at a respectful distance. Bob noticed them, but didn't acknowledge them, keeping his focus entirely on Marie. "Marie, I want to ask you something," Bob said after they'd been talking for nearly an hour. "If you could live, if things could get better, what would you want to do with your life?" Marie thought for a long moment. "I used to want to be a teacher. Before everything fell apart, I was studying at the university. I wanted to teach children, help them learn to read." "That's beautiful," Bob said. "The world needs more teachers like that. Children need people who understand struggle, who can teach them that difficult times don't last, but difficult people do." "But I can't afford to go back to school. I can barely afford to eat." Bob reached into his pocket and pulled out the note Marie had left. "You wrote this because my music helped you. Do you know what you've given me tonight?" Marie shook her head. "You've reminded me why I make music. Not for the crowds or the fame, but for people like you. People who are fighting battles that others can't see. You've given me the greatest gift an artist can receive, the knowledge that what I do matters." The crowd behind them had grown to maybe 50 people now. Someone had a portable radio, and the sound of reggae music drifted softly through the night air. "Marie," Bob said, "I want to make you a promise. If you step away from this railing, if you choose to trust me with one more day, I will help you find a way back to your dreams, not because I'm rich or famous, but because you matter. Because your life has value that extends far beyond your current circumstances." Marie looked at Bob, then at the growing crowd of people who had gathered. "Why are all these people here?" "Because this is Jamaica, and when someone needs help, we come together. Look around, Marie. You're not alone. You never were." Bob stood up slowly and picked up his guitar. "Marie, I was supposed to perform for 25,000 people tonight. Instead, I'm going to perform for the most important audience I've ever had. You." Bob began to play Three Little Birds softly, his voice carrying across the bridge and over the water. "Don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing gonna be all right." As he sang, something magical happened. The people who had gathered began to join in, their voices blending with Bob's in an impromptu chorus of hope. Marie found herself crying, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of despair. Singing "Don't Worry About a Thing, 'Cause Every Little Thing Gonna Be All Right." The crowd sang, their voices creating a wall of sound that seemed to wrap around Marie like a warm embrace. When the song ended, Bob set down his guitar and extended his hand to Marie. "Will you step back from the edge with me? Will you give tomorrow a chance?" Marie looked at Bob's outstretched hand, then at the faces of the 50 strangers who had stopped their lives to sing for her. Slowly, carefully, she stepped away from the railing and took Bob's hand. The crowd erupted in gentle applause and cheers. Bob hugged Marie gently, and she broke down completely, sobbing against his shoulder. "I don't know how to live without them," she whispered, referring to her parents. "You don't have to figure it out tonight," Bob said. "Tonight, you just have to choose to be here tomorrow. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the next step." Bob kept his promise to Marie in ways that went beyond money. He connected her with a scholarship program that allowed her to return to university. More importantly, he introduced her to Rita, his wife, who had also lost her parents young and understood the specific grief Marie was carrying. Marie became a regular visitor to the Marley household, not as a charity case but as family. She finished her education and became a primary school teacher in Kingston, dedicating her career to helping children who were struggling with loss and hardship. But the most powerful part of Marie's story came 20 years later, in 1999, when she was honored as Jamaica's Teacher of the Year. In her acceptance speech, she talked about the night Bob Marley canceled his concert to save her life. "That night on the bridge, I learned that music isn't just entertainment," she told the audience. "Music is medicine. Music is community. Music is the bridge between despair and hope. But most importantly, I learned that no matter how alone you feel, there's always someone willing to sing with you if you just stay long enough to hear them." Marie went on to establish a crisis intervention program that used music therapy to help young people dealing with suicidal thoughts. The program, called Bridge to Tomorrow, has helped hundreds of young Jamaicans find their way back from despair. The bridge where Bob found Marie now has a small plaque that reads, "Every little thing gonna be all right," dedicated to those who choose hope over despair. But perhaps the most beautiful legacy of that night happened in 2019, 40 years later, when Marie's own daughter graduated from university with a degree in music therapy. At the graduation ceremony, Marie stood up and sang "Three Little Birds," the same song that had saved her life decades earlier on a bridge in Kingston. After the ceremony, a reporter asked Marie what she would say to Bob Marley if he were still alive. Marie smiled.